Hi, and welcome back to Literacy Kaleidoscope. Kaleidoscope Literacy. I don't usually remember uh, the title of my show. And welcome to the year 2025. Probably wondering, what happened to you? Why didn't you do any reviews for the end of the year? I got sick. I'm still sick. I have a really bad cold. It was so bad that I basically was only awake for 3 hours Christmas Eve. Finally getting better. But I read a book before I got sick. And I didn't get time to review it because I was sick. And let's put the cover title of it, let's say, Dearest, by Deacon Walter. We have a lot to talk about. But I also read, I'm reading a couple nonfiction books, which I'm just going to do shorts about because how am I going to talk about the psychology when the book is about psychology? So, yeah, I can't talk about like the theories when it's literally about theories of attention and whatnot. But let's talk about Dearest. I'm also reading This Spells Love, which once I'm finished with that book, I will do a short and long review. The nonfiction books I'll just give shorts mostly because if I explain too much about it, I'll just basically be retelling the whole book, which seems unfair. So Dearest. First part of Dearest. I absolutely adored the first part of Dearest. Flora, who's the main character, has just given birth, and her husband, who is actually really supportive and whatnot, and you get an experience of that in the second part of the book, is deployed, which means she's on her own. And the first part of the book is very much the sense of horror and the heart of the unknown, of motherhood, of especially because her mother wasn't an attentive mother. She was neglectful, she was forgetful, and so she feels alone. And she has a sense, like, again, like many mothers, she doesn't know if she's doing the right thing. And she's worried she's hurting her daughter, Iris, which is a weird name, for reasons we'll get into, especially because eye contact becomes a big thing in the second part of the book. She's trying to do the best she can for Iris. And then that's when things get starting to get really weird. And again, you're not fully aware if it's the fact that she hasn't gotten sleep or if there's something up, something wrong in the house. And I would love to say, like, it's not because the house is something wrong with the house, but because of the second part, I'm not entirely sure. Because the second part stops being a domestic horror book, which, I was super excited because I'm like, this is like a domestic horror book. This is like The Lottery. And I love those kind of horror books because they're not written often, where, again, motherhood and all that kind of things are given such a high place in society that speaking bad about motherhood is considered a taboo subject. But domestic horror can be some of the most terrifying stories. And I absolutely love domestic horror. The Husbands is a great example of domestic horror that I read last year. And I absolutely adored it. And it stayed a domestic horror book. There's elements of sci-fi, but those elements were never explored or explained because they weren't the real aspect of it. And the important aspect of it was how having a husband, being in a relationship, changes various aspects of your life and the way you interact with other people. That's the real domestic horror of it. So I was super excited and super invested in this like sense of horror where not she's starting to see her imaginary friend, and it's just her imaginary friend. And she sends an email to her estranged mother that she hasn't seen since her marriage. And then all of a sudden she shows up. And you're like, what the heck's going on? And it's about her really like recognizing and trying to get a real connection with her mother that she hasn't had in like any time of her childhood. And she's never felt that she's been loved by her mother. And then the latter part. Then you get to the second part, and you get that twist, which I will not say, but that twist kind of cheapens the rest of the book. And the rest of the book does have these elements of like fear, but for me, they felt so pale compared to the first part of the book. And the first part of the book felt much more terrifying and much more scarier than the latter part of the book, which was kind of a disappointment for me. But also, which is that I gave it like a 4-point or a 3-point stars to it. Don't remember. I won't check because I'm going by memory. But what I found found really fascinating and really interesting. This also talks a lot about my own interaction, my whole relationship with my mother, which I won't discuss. But the matter of fact that her mother was the inspiration for this book, like, well, it wasn't the inspiration, because she literally, like, says she's not the inspiration for the book, but she gives dedication to her mother. It's like, what was it? The exact quote is, I'm going to read it, because for my mother, who mercifully did not inspire this story, can you hear it? And you can very much hear it, because someone who studied abnormal psychology and has worked in detox centers and stuff like that, and reads a lot of true crime. The only way she can justify or like recognize or rationalize abusive parents by making them into like an element of a supernatural really shows that is so unnatural that she needs to put an element of supernatural so that it makes sense to her. It's really fascinating, and it really shows how much love and care she has for her mother. And so that's a sweet thing, aspect of it. And in that sense, it's a nice book, and it's a really soft, caring book, because she has to put so much supernatural elements to it to justify the cruel acts that Flora's mother has done to her and continuously does to her in the book. There's this element of just demonic forces. I mean, they don't say demonic forces, but kind of demonic, darker forces in play. And so, in that sense, it's really a story where a woman is kind of pulling the opposite of her own, how she was raised, and turning into like a sense of horror and dread. And it was fine, it was good. But for me, again, it missed the mark, because like I was really hoping it'd be a domestic horror, and it just becoming another haunting story kind of felt cheap. It was a good book, but it just could have gone through with the domestic horror and stick to the domestic horror. It would have been perfect. But just because it went into like the supernatural horror, it kind of flopped the landing for me. But yeah, no, if you're into, again, like the haunting stories where the ghosts are kind of metaphors for like mental illness and like family drama and stuff, Dearest is a great book. And it's also written by someone who has a great relationship with her mother, and you can clearly see like the love and the support she got from her mother just because of the how much she puts in for these elements of supernatural, especially the second part. There's parts in the second part where Flora is trying to like see what her mother is now and reticent to the fact that there were moments where her mother was actually a good mother, which, again, for a lot of people, for a lot of children of estranged parents, that is like something that you deal with. The fact that you're in these relationships with their parents that you know you can't be really attached to, but you have these moments of guilt because you remember who they used to be, or you remember them as being. And you feel like a terrible person for not being able to accept them and still love them, but having an understanding that you can't be with them because they'll just be unhealthy for you. And there's a whole line that her husband tells her, like, I don't like you when you're wet with your mother. It's like the bright star that you are dim. And it can become, like, in the first part, you can really see it. I was kind of hoping we'd explore that kind of relationship. But then it just becomes like a haunting story, and it kind of feels that we miss that whole aspect of it. I'm not even going to talk about the ending. The ending is problematic for me, for various reasons, but okay. But it's an interesting book. It starts off with it as a domestic horror, but it's ultimately a haunting story. So I will give that warning ahead of time. If you were looking for it and you're like, oh, this sounds like a domestic horror, it starts off that way, but it is ultimately a haunting story of ghost haunting and family trauma and stuff. So yeah, if you're into that, pick it up. I'm going to, once I'm done with it, I will make a short and then post a long review. Maybe I'll be reviewing it at that time. I'm currently reading a couple of nonfiction books, which I will only do shorts on because, again, I try to explore the psychological aspect of them. I'd be explaining the whole book, but that'd be boring because there are those kind of academic books. And reading This Spells Love, which is about a girl who, does the thing where she makes a wish where she never met her ex. And then she ends up in a reality where she doesn't meet her ex, but also didn't meet her best friend. And so now she's kind of having to find a way to go back to her, to break the spell. And to do so, she has to befriend her best friend. So that's going to be it. That's an interesting read. But yeah, hopefully we get that done by this weekend, which is when I'm going to post my short and my long review, this review. And I'll be also doing a readathon for 2 hours, mostly because I can stand for reading long periods of time, but if I really want to do some deep focus reading, and I'm using the stream as a way to keep me in track, I can only do it for 2 hours. So if you want to see me just read for 2 hours, check me out on the YouTube and Twitch, where I will be streaming for 2 hours where I'm just reading books. So yeah, see you then. Bye.